Chapter 1: The True Nature of Procrastination. Welcome to this journey of self-discovery and transformation. If you've picked up this audiobook, chances are you've experienced the weight of procrastination pressing down on your shoulders. Perhaps you've felt the gnawing anxiety of unfinished tasks, the guilt that creeps in at the end of another unproductive day, or the frustration of watching your dreams slip further away with each postponed decision. But here's what I want you to understand right from the start: procrastination is not what you think it is. It's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. And most importantly, it's not who you are. For too long, we've misunderstood procrastination. We've labeled it as a simple lack of willpower, a moral failing, or evidence of an undisciplined mind. We've beaten ourselves up, made promises we couldn't keep, and wondered why we couldn't just do the things we know we need to do. Society has handed us a narrative that says if you procrastinate, you're simply not trying hard enough. You're weak. You're irresponsible. You lack the discipline that successful people seem to have in abundance. But what if I told you that this entire narrative is fundamentally wrong? What if procrastination is actually your mind's way of protecting you? What if the very behavior you've been fighting against is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism, designed by your brain to keep you safe from perceived threats? This is the fundamental shift in perspective that will change everything for you. Procrastination is not the enemy. It's a messenger. It's your internal system sending you urgent signals about something deeper that needs your attention. And until we learn to decode these messages, until we understand what's really happening beneath the surface, we'll remain trapped in the same cycles of delay, guilt, and disappointment. Let me share something with you. Think about the last time you procrastinated on something important. Maybe it was a project at work, a difficult conversation you needed to have, a creative endeavor you kept pushing aside, or a personal goal you've been talking about for years. Now, here's the critical question: in that moment of delay, what were you actually feeling? If you look closely, if you're truly honest with yourself, beneath the surface of "I just don't feel like it" or "I'll do it tomorrow," you'll find something more complex, something more vulnerable. Perhaps it was fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough, fear of success and what it might demand of you. Or maybe it was perfectionism, that relentless voice telling you that if you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it at all. It might have been overwhelm, the task feeling so large and undefined that your brain simply couldn't figure out where to begin. Or perhaps it was a deep, unspoken belief that you don't deserve success, that you're an imposter waiting to be exposed. This is what I mean when I say procrastination is a protection mechanism. Your brain, that incredible 3-pound universe between your ears, has one primary evolutionary job: to keep you alive and safe. And in the ancient wiring of your nervous system, anything that threatens your sense of security, your self-image, or your emotional stability registers as a danger, as a threat to your survival. It doesn't matter that missing a deadline won't literally kill you. It doesn't matter that starting a business or having a difficult conversation poses no physical danger. Your brain treats emotional pain with the same urgency it treats physical pain. The neural pathways involved in social rejection, for example, overlap significantly with those activated by physical injury. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and the fear of looking foolish in front of your colleagues. Threat is threat. Pain is pain. So when you approach a task that triggers feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, overwhelm, or vulnerability, your brain does exactly what it's designed to do. It protects you. It activates your stress response. It floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline. And then, in an attempt to reduce this uncomfortable activation, it diverts your attention. It finds something, anything, that feels safer in the moment, that provides relief from the discomfort. This is not a conscious decision. This is your nervous system operating on autopilot, using strategies that were developed over millions of years of evolution. This is why you can spend hours scrolling through social media when you have a report due. This is why you suddenly become intensely interested in organizing your desk, doing laundry, or researching the perfect productivity system when you should be working on that presentation. This is why you can feel exhausted and overwhelmed while simultaneously watching television for 3 hours. Your brain isn't being lazy. It's not sabotaging you out of some perverse desire to fail. It's being protective. It's choosing short-term comfort over long-term benefit because, in its ancient logic, surviving the present moment is more important than thriving in the future. The immediate relief from anxiety feels more urgent than the distant consequences of inaction. Now, let's talk about what I call root-level behavior, because this concept is absolutely central to everything we're going to explore together. Imagine a tree. On the surface, you see the trunk, the branches, the leaves swaying in the wind. If some leaves are dying, turning brown and falling off, you might try to treat the leaves directly. You might paint them green or spray them with something or prop them up with wire. But any gardener will tell you that's absurd. That's not how healing works. The problem isn't in the leaves. The leaves are just showing you that there's a problem. The real issue is in the roots, in the soil, in the fundamental system that nourishes the tree. If the roots are damaged, if the soil lacks nutrients, if there's disease in the underground network, no amount of surface treatment will create lasting health. Procrastination is like those dying leaves. It's the visible symptom, the observable behavior, the thing you can see and measure and feel guilty about. But it's not the actual problem. The problem exists at what I call the root level of your psychology. Root level behavior refers to the deep, often unconscious patterns that drive your actions. These are the beliefs you hold about yourself, many of which were formed in childhood and have never been questioned. These are the emotional associations you've built over years of experience, the neural pathways that have been reinforced through repetition until they became automatic. These are the survival strategies your younger self developed to navigate difficult circumstances, strategies that may have helped you then but are limiting you now. When you procrastinate, you're not just avoiding a task. You're responding to a complex web of conditioning, fear responses, identity beliefs, and survival mechanisms that operate far beneath your conscious awareness. You might think you're just being lazy about writing that business plan, but actually, you're responding to a deeply embedded belief that you're not capable of success, a belief that was installed when you were 7 years old and your teacher embarrassed you in front of the class. You might think you're just putting off that difficult conversation, but actually, you're responding to a childhood pattern where expressing your needs led to punishment or abandonment, so your nervous system learned that staying quiet is safer. This is why surface-level solutions don't work. This is why you can read 100 productivity books, download every app, follow every guru's advice, wake up at 5 in the morning, use the Pomodoro technique, practice time blocking, create elaborate systems and schedules, and still find yourself procrastinating. Because you're trying to change the leaves without addressing the roots. You're trying to override a protection mechanism without understanding what it's protecting you from. You're trying to force new behaviors onto an old operating system. It's like trying to run the latest software on a computer from 1995. The hardware can't support it. The system crashes. And you blame yourself for not trying hard enough, when actually, you were set up to fail from the beginning. Let me give you a concrete example, because I think stories help us understand these abstract concepts. Sarah, a talented graphic designer, came to me after years of struggling with procrastination. She had all the skills, all the creative ability, all the opportunities. Clients loved her work when she actually delivered it. But she kept missing deadlines. She kept turning down projects. She kept starting things and never finishing them. She'd sit down at her computer, feel a wave of anxiety, and suddenly find herself deep in a YouTube rabbit hole or reorganizing her digital files or doing anything except the work she needed to do. On the surface, it looked like poor time management. It looked like she just needed better systems, more discipline, stronger willpower. But when we dug deeper, when we stopped looking at the behavior and started exploring the roots, we discovered something else entirely. Sarah grew up with a highly critical father who was himself a frustrated artist. He constantly compared her work to her older sister's work, to professional artists, to some impossible standard of perfection. Every time young Sarah created something and showed it to him, she braced for criticism. And criticism is what she got. It was never good enough. The colors were wrong. The composition was off. She should have done it differently. Over years of this, over thousands of these micro moments of criticism and rejection, Sarah's brain learned a very clear lesson: creating means pain. Putting your work out there means being hurt. Trying means failing and being judged for that failure. So when adult Sarah sat down to work on a design, her brain wasn't thinking about the client or the deadline or her career. Her brain was back in that childhood dining room, bracing for her father's criticism. Her nervous system was flooding her with the same anxiety she felt at 8 years old. And what does a brain do when it perceives threat? It protects. It avoids. It finds an escape. The procrastination wasn't the problem. It was the solution her brain had developed to avoid the anticipated pain of criticism and rejection. The YouTube videos, the file organizing, the endless preparation that never led to action, these were all escape routes from the discomfort of vulnerability. Sarah wasn't lazy. Her brain was protecting her from pain. The procrastination was a symptom. The root was a deeply embedded belief that her work would never be good enough, combined with an automatic fear response that had been reinforced thousands of times over years, creating a neural pathway so strong and so automatic that she wasn't even consciously aware it was happening. She just knew that sitting down to work felt awful, so she avoided it. This brings us to something crucial about the modern world we live in, because the environment we're navigating today is unlike anything humans have experienced before. We are surrounded by what I call weapons of mass distraction. Never before in human history have we had such powerful technologies specifically designed to capture and hold our attention. Social media platforms employ teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists whose entire job is to make their products as addictive as possible. Every notification, every like, every comment, every autoplay video, every infinite scroll is engineered to trigger dopamine release in your brain, creating the same reward pathways that gambling and other addictive behaviors create. These technologies have literally been designed to hijack your attention, to create behavioral loops that keep you coming back, to make you feel like you're missing something if you're not constantly checking. And here's what makes this particularly insidious when it comes to procrastination: these distractions offer immediate, effortless relief from discomfort. Your brain is already looking for an escape from the anxiety of that difficult task, from the vulnerability of that creative project, from the uncertainty of that important decision. And suddenly, perfectly timed, there's a notification. There's a red dot. There's something new to look at. The friction to open your phone is zero. The reward is immediate. The relief is instant. And before you know it, you've lost 2 hours to an endless scroll, all while the task you were avoiding grows more urgent, more anxiety-inducing, more impossible feeling. But it's not just external distractions we're dealing with. Modern life has also created a culture of emotional avoidance. We're taught from a young age to be always positive, always productive, always on, always performing. We're told that negative emotions are problems to be solved, obstacles to be overcome, weaknesses to be hidden. There's an entire industry built around helping people eliminate anxiety, avoid discomfort, and achieve permanent happiness. The message is clear: if you're feeling bad, something is wrong. Fix it. Get rid of it. Don't just sit there feeling uncomfortable. So we've lost something essential. We've lost the ability to simply be with discomfort. We've lost the capacity to feel fear, anxiety, boredom, or uncertainty without immediately reaching for something to make it go away. We've become intolerant of the natural fluctuations of emotional experience. And this matters enormously when it comes to procrastination, because procrastination thrives in this environment. It's the ultimate emotional avoidance strategy. You feel uncomfortable about a task, and instead of investigating that discomfort, instead of being curious about what it's telling you, instead of allowing it to be there while you take action anyway, you reach for the nearest distraction. And in our modern world, that distraction is always within reach, always ready to provide that hit of temporary relief. Think about it this way. Your emotional experience is like an internal weather system. Sometimes it's sunny and pleasant. Sometimes there are clouds and a bit of rain. Sometimes there are storms with thunder and lightning. In previous generations, people had no choice but to learn how to weather these internal storms. If you were anxious, you sat with the anxiety. If you were bored, you sat with the boredom. There was no phone to check, no Netflix to binge, no endless stream of content to numb yourself with. You had to develop the capacity to be with whatever you were feeling. But now, we have the emotional equivalent of climate control. We have the ability to immediately change our internal weather at the press of a button. Feeling bored? Here's entertainment. Feeling anxious? Here's a distraction. Feeling inadequate? Here's a perfectly curated feed of other people's highlight reels to lose yourself in. Feeling uncertain about your direction in life? Here's an article about someone who has it all figured out. We never have to sit with discomfort anymore. We never have to build the muscle of emotional tolerance. But here's the paradox, and it's a painful one: the more we avoid discomfort, the less capable we become of handling it. And the less capable we are of handling discomfort, the more we procrastinate. Because procrastination is fundamentally about avoiding the discomfort associated with a task. It's a vicious cycle, and it's one that our modern world actively reinforces. We're becoming collectively less capable of doing hard things, not because we're weaker or lazier than previous generations, but because we're constantly being offered easy escapes from difficulty. We're training ourselves to avoid rather than to engage. And procrastination is the natural result. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a profound understanding, an understanding that has the power to change everything if you really let it in. Procrastination is not your enemy. It's not a sign that you're broken or lazy or undisciplined or morally deficient. It's a complex response to deeper issues: fear, perfectionism, overwhelm, unclear values, distorted beliefs about yourself, emotional avoidance patterns, and a nervous system that's trying to keep you safe using outdated strategies that once served you but now limit you. This understanding is not just theoretical. It's not just interesting psychology to know about. It's the key to your freedom. Because once you understand that procrastination is a protection mechanism, once you see it as a messenger rather than a monster, everything changes. You stop fighting yourself. You stop adding guilt and shame to the equation, which only makes procrastination worse by adding more discomfort to avoid. Instead, you become curious. You become compassionate. You start asking different questions. Not why am I so lazy, but what am I afraid of here? What is this procrastination protecting me from? What do I need to feel safe enough to take action? What old belief is running this show? This is root-level work. This is what it means to stop procrastination at its source. Not by white-knuckling your way through tasks, not by relying on motivation that comes and goes like the tide, not by beating yourself up until you comply, but by understanding and addressing the deep patterns that drive your behavior. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore exactly how to do this. We'll learn to decode the specific messages your procrastination is sending. We'll develop the capacity to be with discomfort without immediately escaping it. We'll update those old beliefs and create new, more accurate stories about who you are and what you're capable of. We'll rebuild your relationship with action, with failure, with uncertainty, with yourself. But it all starts here, with this fundamental shift in understanding. Procrastination is not who you are. It's what you do when your brain perceives threat. And just like any other learned response, it can be unlearned, rewired, transformed. Your brain is not working against you. It's trying to help you with the only tools it knows, with the strategies that made sense given your history and experience. Our job, the work we're doing together, is to give it better tools, more accurate information, and a safer internal environment in which to operate. So take a breath right now. Feel the weight of self-judgment lifting just a little. Let go of the story that you're lazy. Let go of the belief that you lack discipline. You're not broken. You're not defective. You're human, with a beautifully complex human brain, navigating a world that's more challenging and distracting than ever before. And you're about to learn how to work with your mind, rather than against it, to create the life you actually want to live. This is not about becoming a productivity machine. This is not about cramming more tasks into your day. This is about becoming free. Free from the internal battles. Free from the guilt and shame. Free to engage fully with your life, your work, your relationships, your purpose. That freedom is possible. And it starts with understanding. Let's continue this journey together. Chapter 2: The Emotional Roots: Fear, Overwhelm, Avoidance. Now that we understand procrastination as a protection mechanism rather than a character flaw, we need to go deeper. We need to explore the specific emotional forces that trigger this protective response. Because here's what most people don't realize: beneath every episode of procrastination, beneath every delay and every avoidance, there's an emotion. There's a feeling you're trying not to feel. And until we learn to identify these hidden emotions, until we bring them into the light and understand what they're telling us, we'll remain stuck in the same patterns. The truth is, most procrastination is fear-based. It's not about laziness or poor time management or lack of discipline. It's about fear. But not the kind of fear we typically recognize. Not the fear of a charging bear or a car speeding toward you. This is a more subtle, more insidious kind of fear. It's the fear of failure, of not being good enough, of being exposed as inadequate. It's the fear of success and what it might demand of you. It's the fear of judgment, of rejection, of losing the identity you've built for yourself. It's the fear of uncertainty, of stepping into the unknown without a guarantee of how things will turn out. These fears don't announce themselves clearly. You don't wake up in the morning and think, "I'm terrified of being inadequate, so I'm going to avoid this project." Instead, what you experience is a vague sense of discomfort, a feeling of heaviness, a sudden conviction that now is not the right time, that you need to do more research first, that you'll start tomorrow when you feel more ready. The fear operates in the background, hidden from your conscious awareness, but powerfully influencing your behavior nonetheless. Let me introduce you to a concept that will change how you see your own resistance: invisible emotional resistance. This is the phenomenon where you feel an inexplicable barrier between you and action, but you can't quite articulate what that barrier is. You know you should start that project, make that phone call, have that conversation, take that risk. You know it's important. You want the outcomes it will bring. And yet, when you approach it, you hit an invisible wall. Your body feels heavy. Your mind goes blank or becomes hyperactive with distractions. You suddenly feel tired or hungry or like you absolutely must check your email right now. This is invisible emotional resistance, and it's one of the primary ways fear manifests in procrastination. The invisibility is crucial here. If you could clearly identify the fear, if you could say, "I'm afraid of failing at this," you'd have something to work with. You could address it directly, challenge it, develop strategies to move forward despite it. But because the fear operates beneath conscious awareness, because it shows up as tiredness or distraction or sudden urgent tasks, you end up fighting symptoms instead of causes. You try to force yourself to focus, to push through the resistance, to manufacture motivation. And it doesn't work because you're not addressing the actual problem, which is the unacknowledged fear creating that invisible wall. Think about the last time you procrastinated on something important. Can you remember what you were feeling in your body as you approached that task? Most people report a tightness in the chest, a knot in the stomach, a sense of constriction in the throat. These are not random sensations. These are your body's way of signaling fear, anxiety, and threat. Your nervous system is activating its defense mechanisms. And when your nervous system perceives threat, it doesn't care about your goals or your deadlines or your logical understanding of what needs to happen. It cares about keeping you safe. So it creates resistance. It makes action feel difficult, heavy, impossible. And then, when you back away from the threat, when you choose the distraction instead, you feel immediate relief. Your nervous system relaxes. The discomfort eases. You've successfully avoided the perceived danger. Your brain registers this as success, which reinforces the pattern for next time. Now let's talk about how your brain amplifies threat perception, because this is critical to understanding why procrastination feels so overwhelming. Your brain has a built-in negativity bias. This is a well-documented evolutionary feature where your brain is much more sensitive to potential threats than to potential rewards. This made perfect sense for our ancestors. If you failed to notice a predator, you died. If you failed to notice a ripe fruit, you could find food tomorrow. So the brains that survived, the ones we inherited, are the ones that were hypervigilant about danger. The ones that assumed the worst. The ones that constantly scanned for threats and overestimated their severity. This negativity bias means your brain naturally exaggerates threat. When you're facing a difficult conversation, your brain doesn't calmly assess the realistic range of outcomes. It jumps to catastrophic scenarios. You'll say the wrong thing. They'll reject you completely. You'll lose your job, your relationship, your reputation. When you're starting a new project, your brain doesn't focus on the learning and growth opportunities. It fixates on all the ways you might fail, all the proof that you're not qualified, all the people who will judge you when you inevitably fall short. When you're considering taking a risk, your brain doesn't weigh the potential rewards equally with the potential costs. It magnifies the costs, makes them feel more real and more likely than they actually are. This is not a bug in your system. This is a feature. It's your survival programming. But here's the problem: this programming was calibrated for a world of physical threats, not emotional ones. Your brain treats the possibility of embarrassment with the same alarm system it would use for a physical attack. It responds to the uncertainty of a career change the same way it would respond to being lost in the wilderness. The threat perception is completely out of proportion to the actual danger. And this exaggerated threat perception is what makes procrastination feel so necessary, so justified. You're not being irrational when you avoid that task. From your nervous system's perspective, you're being appropriately cautious about a serious threat. Let me give you a concrete example. Marcus is a talented writer who had dreamed of publishing a novel for 15 years. He had the story in his mind. He had the skills. He had the time. But every time he sat down to write, he felt paralyzed. He'd open his laptop, stare at the blank page, feel a wave of anxiety, and within minutes find himself researching writing techniques or organizing his files or doing literally anything except writing. He couldn't understand it. He wanted this so badly. Why couldn't he just do it? When we explored his invisible emotional resistance, we discovered layers of fear he hadn't consciously acknowledged. At the surface was fear of failure, the worry that his writing wouldn't be good enough, that he'd pour his heart into this project and it would be rejected by publishers and readers. But beneath that was something deeper: fear of success. If he actually wrote a great novel, if it actually got published and did well, his entire life would change. He'd be visible. People would have opinions about his work. He'd have to identify as a successful writer, which felt fraudulent and terrifying. And beneath even that was the deepest fear, that the act of completing this dream would reveal that it wasn't what he thought it would be, that he'd feel empty even after achieving it, that he'd have to face the question of what his life was really about. These fears were invisible to Marcus. What he experienced consciously was just resistance, distraction, and self-criticism for not being disciplined enough. But his brain, perceiving all these threats simultaneously, was creating massive resistance to protect him from them. The procrastination wasn't the problem. It was his nervous system's best attempt at a solution. And until Marcus could acknowledge these fears, until he could see them clearly and work with them directly, no amount of willpower or productivity techniques would overcome the resistance. This brings us to overwhelm, which is one of the most common emotional states underlying procrastination. Overwhelm happens when your brain perceives a task or situation as too big, too complex, too undefined, or too demanding for your current resources. It's that feeling of drowning, of not knowing where to start, of the path forward being completely unclear. And here's what's crucial to understand: overwhelm is not caused by the actual size or complexity of a task. It's caused by how your brain is representing that task to itself. Let me explain what I mean. Imagine you need to organize a conference. Your brain could represent this in multiple ways. It could see it as one unified project with a clear endpoint. Or it could see it as hundreds of individual tasks: finding a venue, creating a budget, reaching out to speakers, designing promotional materials, setting up registration, coordinating catering, managing technology, and on and on. If your brain represents the conference as hundreds of separate tasks, all flooding your awareness simultaneously, all feeling equally urgent, you're going to feel overwhelmed. Your cognitive system will become overloaded. You'll feel paralyzed. And what happens when you feel overwhelmed? You procrastinate. You back away. You do something else that feels more manageable. This is the overwhelm cycle, and it's a vicious one. A task feels overwhelming, so you avoid it. By avoiding it, you don't develop clarity or momentum. The task remains undefined and anxiety-inducing. Meanwhile, deadlines approach, consequences loom, and the task becomes associated with even more stress and anxiety. So the next time you approach it, it feels even more overwhelming. The cycle reinforces itself. And the longer it continues, the more impossible the task feels, the more shame and guilt accumulate, and the harder it becomes to break free. Here's a real-world example. Jennifer is a small business owner who needed to implement a new customer relationship management system. She knew it was important. She knew it would save time and improve her operations in the long run. But every time she thought about it, she felt crushed by overwhelm. There were so many options to evaluate. So much data to migrate. So many processes to redesign. So many things that could go wrong. Her brain represented this as an enormous, undefined mountain of work. So she kept putting it off, month after month, while her inefficient systems cost her time and opportunities every single day. When we worked together, we discovered that Jennifer's overwhelm wasn't really about the CRM system. It was about how her brain was representing the task. She was seeing the entire project all at once, as if she had to do everything simultaneously, as if every decision had to be perfect, as if one wrong choice would lead to disaster. We broke the overwhelm cycle by changing the representation. Instead of implement a CRM system, which felt impossibly large, we defined one clear next action: spend 30 minutes researching 3 specific CRM options. That's it. Not making a final decision, not implementing anything, just 30 minutes of focused research. Suddenly, the task went from overwhelming to manageable. She could see herself doing that. And once she did, momentum built. The next action became clear. The project that had paralyzed her for months got completed in 3 weeks once we addressed the root cause, her brain's overwhelming representation of the task. Now let's talk about mental avoidance, because this is where things get really interesting. Mental avoidance is different from simply not doing a task. It's the active process of keeping that task out of your awareness, of diverting your attention every time it comes up, of maintaining a state of not thinking about it. And this takes tremendous mental energy. In fact, mental avoidance is exhausting. You might wonder why you feel so drained at the end of a day when you didn't actually do much. Often, it's because you spent the entire day in mental avoidance, unconsciously expending energy to keep uncomfortable thoughts and feelings at bay. This is how it works. There's something you need to do, something that triggers discomfort. Maybe it's a difficult email you need to send, a financial issue you need to address, a health concern you need to deal with. The task sits in the back of your mind, creating a low-level buzz of anxiety. But instead of addressing it directly, instead of feeling the discomfort and taking action, you engage in mental avoidance. You keep yourself busy with other things. You stay in constant motion. You fill every moment with distraction. You never let yourself be still enough or quiet enough for the uncomfortable truth to surface fully. You know it's there, lurking in the background, but you've become skilled at not looking directly at it. And here's the tragic irony. The mental avoidance creates more suffering than actually facing the task would. The energy you expend keeping something out of awareness, the anxiety that hums constantly in the background, the loss of presence and peace because part of you is always on guard, all of this is more painful than the temporary discomfort of actually doing the difficult thing. But your brain doesn't know this. Your brain is operating on short-term logic: avoid discomfort now, worry about consequences later. Let me share the story of David, a graphic designer who had been avoiding a particular client for 3 months. This client had requested revisions on a project, revisions that David thought were unnecessary and would actually make the design worse. He knew he needed to have a conversation about it, to explain his professional opinion, to negotiate a solution. But the thought of that conversation filled him with anxiety. What if the client got angry? What if they demanded a refund? What if word got out that he was difficult to work with? So David engaged in mental avoidance. He responded to other emails, but not that one. He worked on other projects. He kept himself busy enough that he could justify not having time to deal with it. But the avoided conversation haunted him. Every time his phone buzzed, he felt a spike of anxiety. Every time he opened his email, he felt the weight of that unread message. His sleep suffered. His other work suffered because he couldn't fully focus. He felt a constant, low-grade dread. Finally, after 3 months of this torture, we worked together to break the avoidance pattern. He made the phone call. And you know what happened? The conversation was difficult, yes. There was some tension. But it lasted 12 minutes. They found a compromise. The client was actually relieved to finally hear from him. And when David hung up the phone, he felt like he could breathe for the first time in months. The relief was overwhelming. 3 months of suffering, of mental energy expended in avoidance, of anxiety and dread, all to avoid 12 minutes of discomfort. This is the cruel math of mental avoidance. The avoidance creates far more pain than the thing being avoided. So why do we do it? Why do we engage in this obviously counterproductive behavior? Because of something called temporal discounting. Your brain values immediate comfort much more highly than future comfort. The relief you feel right now from avoiding a difficult task is worth more to your brain than the peace you'd feel tomorrow from having completed it. It's the same mechanism that makes us choose junk food over healthy food, immediate gratification over long-term goals, the easy path over the meaningful one. We're not wired to optimize for our future selves. We're wired to optimize for our present comfort. And procrastination, avoidance, and mental gymnastics are all ways we prioritize feeling okay right now, even at the cost of feeling terrible later. But here's what gives me hope. What should give you hope? Once you understand these patterns, once you can see the invisible emotional resistance, once you recognize the exaggerated threat perception and the overwhelm cycles and the mental avoidance, you gain power over them. They lose their invisible grip. You can start to catch yourself in the act. You can notice the fear arising. You can recognize overwhelm for what it is, a problem of representation, not reality. You can see mental avoidance draining your energy and make a different choice. The emotions underlying procrastination, fear and overwhelm and anxiety, they're not your enemies. They're information. They're signals from your nervous system that something needs attention. Fear tells you that you care about something, that there's something at stake. Overwhelm tells you that a task needs to be broken down or clarified. Anxiety tells you that you're approaching something that matters, something that will stretch you and help you grow. These emotions are not obstacles to be eliminated. They're guides to be understood and worked with. In the next chapter, we'll explore specific practices for working with these emotions, for transforming your relationship with discomfort, for building what I call emotional courage. But for now, just sit with this awareness. Notice where in your life you're experiencing invisible emotional resistance. Notice how your brain might be exaggerating threat. Notice the overwhelm cycles and the mental avoidance patterns. Don't judge them. Don't try to fix them yet. Just see them. Because seeing clearly is the first step toward freedom. When you bring unconscious patterns into conscious awareness, you create the possibility for change. And that possibility is where transformation begins. Remember, you're not broken. You're not weak. You're human, with a human nervous system that's doing exactly what it's designed to do, protect you from perceived threat. The problem isn't you. The problem is that your threat detection system is outdated, calibrated for dangers that no longer exist, responding to emotional discomfort as if it were physical danger. But this can be recalibrated. Your brain can learn new patterns. Your nervous system can develop new responses. You can teach yourself to move toward discomfort instead of away from it, to see fear as a signal rather than a stop sign, to transform overwhelm into clarity and action. This is the work we're doing together. This is the path to stopping procrastination at its root. And you're already taking the first steps simply by understanding what's really happening beneath the surface. Let's continue this journey. Chapter 3: The Cognitive Roots, Weak Systems, Undefined Tasks, Low Clarity. Welcome to the third chapter of our journey into understanding procrastination at its deepest levels. We've explored the emotional landscape, the fears and protective mechanisms that keep us stuck. Now we turn our attention to something equally powerful but often invisible: the cognitive architecture that either supports or sabotages our ability to take action. This is where procrastination reveals itself not just as an emotional problem, but as a structural one, a design flaw in how we organize our thoughts, define our tasks, and manage the limited resources of our mental energy. What you're about to discover is that much of what you've labeled as laziness or lack of willpower is actually something far more specific: cognitive overload, unclear objectives, and systems that work against rather than with how your brain naturally functions. The good news is that once you understand these cognitive roots, you can redesign your approach to make action not just possible, but natural and even effortless. Let's begin by examining a truth that will transform how you think about the tasks you avoid. Why unclear tasks are naturally postponed. Imagine I tell you, work on the project. What exactly am I asking you to do? Your brain immediately encounters a problem. The instruction is vague, undefined, lacking in specificity. Where do you start? What does work on actually mean? What would constitute completion of this directive? The absence of clarity creates friction, and friction creates resistance, and resistance manifests as procrastination. Now imagine instead I say, open the project document and write the first 3 bullet points of the introduction section. Notice the difference? Your brain now has a concrete, specific action to execute. There's no ambiguity, no need to figure out what to do. The path forward is clear, and clarity removes one of the primary barriers to action. This is the first cognitive root of procrastination: unclear tasks naturally trigger avoidance. Your brain is fundamentally an energy-conserving organ. When faced with ambiguity, it has to expend additional cognitive resources just to figure out what the task actually entails before it can even begin executing. This creates what psychologists call an implementation intention gap, the space between knowing you should do something and knowing precisely how to do it. The wider this gap, the more likely you are to procrastinate. Think about the tasks currently sitting on your to-do list. How many of them are actually well-defined actions versus vague intentions? Exercise more is an intention, not a task. Run for 20 minutes on the trail behind my house at 7 a.m. is a task. Get organized is an intention. Spend 15 minutes sorting papers on my desk into 3 piles: file, action needed, and recycle is a task. The difference is specificity, and specificity is the antidote to procrastination born from ambiguity. But why does the brain resist unclear tasks so strongly? Because ambiguity signals potential danger to your nervous system. In our evolutionary past, unclear situations often meant hidden threats. Your brain is wired to be cautious around the unknown. When a task lacks definition, your brain can't accurately assess the effort required, the time it will take, or whether you have the resources to complete it. This uncertainty triggers a subtle stress response, a feeling of unease that makes avoidance feel safer than engagement. Moreover, undefined tasks create what's called a completion ambiguity problem. You can't visualize what done looks like, which means your brain can't generate the motivating anticipation of completion. Think about how satisfying it feels to check off a completed task. That satisfaction requires knowing what completion means. Without it, you're working toward an invisible, ever-receding finish line, and your motivation systems simply don't engage with that kind of target. There's also the decision cost embedded in vague tasks. Every undefined task actually contains multiple hidden decisions that you'll have to make once you start. Write the report contains decisions about structure, length, tone, which information to include, how to organize it, where to begin, and dozens more. Each of these decisions consumes mental energy, and your brain, sensing this upcoming expenditure, resists starting. It's not laziness. It's your brain trying to conserve resources in the face of high cognitive demand. Consider how this plays out in real life. You tell yourself you need to deal with your finances. This vague directive sits in your mind, generating mild anxiety but no action. Why? Because deal with finances might mean reviewing last month's spending, creating a budget, paying bills, organizing receipts, researching investment options, or calling your bank about a fee. Your brain sees all these possibilities and freezes, overwhelmed by the lack of direction. But if you instead say, I will log into my bank account and categorize last week's transactions, suddenly you have a clear, executable action. The resistance drops dramatically. The solution is ruthless clarity. Before you add anything to your to-do list or commit to any action, force yourself to define it with precision. What exactly will you do? Where will you do it? When will you do it? What does completion look like? The more specific you can be, the more you remove the cognitive barriers that trigger procrastination. This isn't about being rigid or controlling. It's about working with your brain's natural preference for clear, well-defined objectives over ambiguous, energy-intensive uncertainty. Mental Model 1: Activation Energy. Let's introduce a powerful metaphor from chemistry that perfectly explains a fundamental aspect of procrastination. In chemical reactions, activation energy is the minimum amount of energy required to initiate a reaction. Even if a reaction will eventually release energy and proceed naturally, it needs that initial push to get started. A match needs a spark. A fire needs kindling. A boulder needs a force to start rolling down a hill. The same principle applies to human behavior and task initiation. Every action you might take has an associated activation energy, a psychological threshold you must cross to begin. Some actions have low activation energy. Checking your phone requires almost no mental effort to start. Watching a video is immediate. These behaviors happen easily because the activation energy is minimal. Other actions have high activation energy. Starting a complex project, having a difficult conversation, tackling a problem you don't fully understand, these require significant mental and emotional resources just to begin. Here's where procrastination enters the picture. When a task has high activation energy and you're in a low energy state, the gap between what you have and what you need feels insurmountable. Your brain calculates, consciously or unconsciously, that you don't have enough resources to clear the threshold, so it doesn't even try. It redirects you toward activities with lower activation energy, things you can do easily right now. This is why you find yourself scrolling social media instead of starting your work. It's not that you don't want to work. It's that the activation energy required to start working exceeds your available mental energy in that moment. But understanding activation energy gives you leverage. If you can lower the activation energy required to start a task, you make procrastination less likely. How do you lower activation energy? Through preparation, through reducing friction, through making the first step as small and simple as possible. Think about exercise. If your activation energy is high, getting to the gym might feel impossible. You have to gather workout clothes, pack a bag, drive there, find parking, check in, change, and only then begin exercising. Each of these steps adds to the activation energy. But what if you prepare the night before? Lay out your workout clothes beside your bed. Pack your bag in advance. Choose a gym on your route to work. Suddenly, the activation energy drops. Or better yet, what if you exercise at home? Now the activation energy is simply putting on clothes you already own and pressing play on a video or stepping onto equipment already in your space. The same principle applies to any task. Want to write but find starting difficult? Lower the activation energy by keeping a document open on your computer, by having your writing space already set up, by pre-deciding what you'll write about before you sit down. Want to eat healthier but find meal preparation overwhelming? Lower the activation energy by prepping ingredients in advance, by having simple recipes bookmarked, by keeping healthy snacks visible and accessible. There's also a temporal aspect to activation energy. The energy required to start a task right now is often lower than the energy required to start it later. This seems counterintuitive, but it's true. Right now, you're already in a state of wakefulness and some degree of mental engagement. Your prefrontal cortex is online. Your attention is available. But if you delay, you lose this momentum. You'll have to overcome inertia again later, and by then, your energy might be depleted by other activities, making the activation energy feel even higher. This is why the do it now principle is so effective. Not because it's about forcing yourself, but because activation energy is often lowest in the present moment. When you think I should do this, that's actually your brain signaling that it has the resources available now. If you delay, you're gambling that you'll have equal or greater resources later, but that's rarely the case. Energy depletes throughout the day. Decisions accumulate. Distractions multiply. The activation energy climbs. Understanding this model also helps you be strategic about task sequencing. Handle high activation energy tasks when your mental resources are fullest, typically early in the day or after rest. Save low activation energy tasks for when you're depleted. This isn't about willpower. It's about resource management, about matching task demands to available energy. There's one more crucial insight here. Once you overcome the activation energy and start a task, continuing often requires far less energy than starting did. This is Newton's first law applied to behavior. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. The hardest part is always the beginning. Once you're engaged, momentum carries you. This is why so many productivity techniques focus on just starting, on overcoming that initial threshold. Because once you're past it, the task itself often becomes easier than the anticipation of it. Mental Model 2, Task Chunking. Your brain has a remarkable capacity for processing information, but it's not unlimited. Cognitive science has demonstrated again and again that we can only hold a limited amount of information in our working memory at once, typically between 3 and 7 distinct items. When you exceed this capacity, your brain becomes overwhelmed, processing slows, errors increase, and the whole system becomes stressed. This has profound implications for procrastination. When you look at a large, complex task as a single overwhelming entity, you're asking your brain to process something beyond its natural capacity. The result is cognitive overload, and overload triggers avoidance. Your brain essentially says, "This is too much. I can't process this. Let's do something simpler." And so you procrastinate, not from lack of desire or ability, but from exceeding your cognitive processing limits. Task chunking is the solution. It's the practice of breaking large, overwhelming tasks into smaller, manageable pieces that fit within your brain's natural processing capacity. Instead of write a book, you chunk it down to write the outline for chapter 1. Instead of renovate the house, you chunk it to research contractors for the kitchen remodel. Instead of learn programming, you chunk it to complete lesson 1 of the Python tutorial. Each chunk is small enough that your working memory can fully encompass it. You can see the whole task, understand what's required, and hold all the necessary information in your mind simultaneously. This removes the cognitive overload that triggers procrastination. The task feels doable because it is doable within the constraints of how your brain actually works. But effective chunking is more than just making things smaller. It's about creating meaningful units, pieces that have a clear beginning, middle, and end, that produce a sense of completion when finished. A good chunk is something you can point to afterward and say, "I did that." This completion feedback is psychologically crucial. It provides the motivation to continue to the next chunk. Let me share an example of chunking in action. Imagine you need to prepare a presentation for a major client meeting. Viewed as a whole, this task is overwhelming. Research the client, understand their needs, develop key messages, create slides, practice delivery, prepare for questions. Your brain looks at this mountain and wants to run away. But chunk it properly and everything changes. Chunk 1, spend 30 minutes researching the client's recent news and challenges. That's it. Nothing more. You can hold that entire task in your mind. You do it. You complete it. You have concrete output, notes on the client's situation. Chunk 2, draft 3 key messages you want to communicate, 1 sentence each. Again, fully graspable. You do it. You complete it. You have your messages written down. Chunk 3. Create a rough outline of the presentation structure on paper. No slides yet, just the flow of ideas. Doable. Complete. Move forward. Chunk 4. Design the title slide and opening slide. Just those two. Done. You see the pattern? Each chunk is small enough to avoid overwhelming your cognitive capacity, yet substantial enough to produce real progress. String enough chunks together and you've completed something that initially felt impossible. The key is that at no point did you have to hold the entire project in your working memory. You only had to focus on one chunk at a time. There's also a psychological benefit to chunking that goes beyond cognitive load. Each completed chunk provides a small victory, a moment of accomplishment that releases a bit of dopamine and reinforces your sense of capability. These small victories accumulate, building confidence and momentum. You're not waiting until the entire project is done to feel successful. You're experiencing success multiple times throughout the process. Chunking also makes time estimation more accurate. You can't reliably estimate how long it will take to write a book, but you can estimate how long it will take to write 300 words of Chapter 1. Better time estimation means better planning, which means less overwhelm, which means less procrastination. You can look at your day and think, I have 45 minutes. That's enough for these two chunks. The task fits your available resources, so you're more likely to start. Moreover, chunking creates natural stopping and starting points. When you complete a chunk, you can take a break without feeling like you're abandoning the task midstream. This prevents burnout and maintains the sustainable pace that long-term projects require. You're not forcing yourself to push through exhaustion. You're working in natural units that respect your cognitive limits. The practice of chunking trains your brain to automatically break down complexity. Over time, when you encounter large tasks, you don't see overwhelming monoliths. You immediately see component parts, a sequence of manageable steps. This skill transfers across all areas of your life, making you more capable of handling complexity without triggering the avoidance response. Mental Model 3: Cognitive Load. Now let's go deeper into understanding the mental resources that enable or prevent action. Cognitive load refers to the total amount of mental effort being used in your working memory at any given time. Think of your working memory as a mental workspace, like RAM in a computer. It's where you consciously process information, make decisions, solve problems, and execute tasks. But this workspace has limited capacity, and when it's overloaded, your performance degrades dramatically. There are 3 types of cognitive load that are relevant to understanding procrastination. The first is intrinsic cognitive load, the inherent difficulty of the task itself. Learning advanced mathematics has higher intrinsic cognitive load than sorting laundry. Some tasks simply require more mental resources than others, and there's no getting around that. The second is extraneous cognitive load, the unnecessary mental effort imposed by poor task design, distractions, or unclear instructions. This is load you can reduce or eliminate. A cluttered workspace creates extraneous load. A confusing process document creates extraneous load. Constant notifications create extraneous load. This type of load is pure waste, consuming mental resources without contributing to task completion. The third is germane cognitive load, the mental effort dedicated to processing and understanding, to building schemas and mental models that make future performance easier. This is productive load, the kind that leads to learning and skill development. Here's how this connects to procrastination. When the total cognitive load, the sum of all 3 types, exceeds your available mental capacity, your brain shifts into a protective mode. It becomes less capable of complex thought, more prone to distraction, and more likely to avoid the overloading task entirely. Procrastination, in this context, is your brain's way of saying, I'm at capacity. I can't take on more right now. Most people don't realize how much extraneous cognitive load they're carrying at any given moment. You have multiple browser tabs open, each representing an unfinished task or potential distraction. You have notifications enabled on your devices, each one a small demand on your attention. You have a cluttered physical environment, forcing your brain to constantly filter out visual noise. You have unclear priorities, meaning your brain is constantly running background calculations about what you should be doing instead of what you are doing. All of this is extraneous cognitive load, and it's draining your capacity to engage with important work. The solution is ruthless load management. First, identify and eliminate as much extraneous load as possible. Close unnecessary tabs. Turn off notifications. Clean your workspace. Clarify your priorities so you're not constantly second-guessing yourself. These actions might seem trivial, but each one frees up cognitive resources that can be redirected toward productive work. Second, be strategic about intrinsic load. Don't try to tackle the hardest parts of a task when your cognitive resources are depleted. If you know a task is inherently demanding, schedule it for when you're at your mental peak. And when working on high intrinsic load tasks, be extra vigilant about minimizing extraneous load. You need all available resources focused on the essential difficulty of the work, not wasted on preventable distractions and inefficiencies. Third, recognize that your total cognitive capacity fluctuates throughout the day. You have more mental resources in the morning, after rest, and when you're well nourished and hydrated. You have fewer resources when tired, stressed, hungry, or after a long day of making decisions. Match your tasks to your available capacity. Don't expect yourself to handle high cognitive load work when you're running on empty. There's also an important principle called cognitive offloading that's relevant here. Your brain knows it has limited capacity, so it's constantly looking for ways to reduce load. One healthy way to do this is to externalize information. Write things down instead of trying to remember them. Use checklists to reduce the mental effort of tracking steps. Create systems and routines that automate decisions. Each of these practices reduces cognitive load, freeing up mental resources for the work that actually matters. Understanding cognitive load also explains why multitasking is such a productivity killer. When you try to handle multiple tasks simultaneously, you're not actually doing them in parallel. You're rapidly switching between them, and each switch carries a cognitive cost. You have to reorient to the new task, reload relevant information into working memory, and suppress the previous task context. These switching costs add up quickly, dramatically increasing your total cognitive load and making procrastination more likely because everything feels harder than it should. The awareness of cognitive load transforms how you approach your work. You stop berating yourself for not being able to handle overwhelming situations. Instead, you recognize that you were simply exceeding your cognitive capacity, and the solution isn't more willpower, it's better load management. You design your environment, your tasks, and your schedule to respect the limited resource of mental energy, and in doing so, you make consistent action possible rather than requiring heroic effort. The psychological power of small beginnings. There's something almost magical that happens when you make the first small step toward a goal, something that defies logical explanation but is psychologically profound. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, the ancient wisdom says, and while this is literally true, it's the psychological truth that matters most. That first step, however small, transforms your relationship with the entire journey. When a task sits before you, untouched and looming, it exists primarily in your imagination. And your imagination, especially when influenced by fear or overwhelm, tends toward catastrophizing. The task grows in your mind. It becomes more difficult, more time-consuming, more complicated than it actually is. This imagined version of the task is what triggers procrastination. You're not avoiding the real task. You're avoiding your inflated mental projection of it. But the moment you take the first small action, something shifts. Reality replaces imagination. You're no longer speculating about how hard it might be. You're experiencing how hard it actually is, and almost invariably, the reality is less daunting than the projection. That gap between imagined difficulty and actual difficulty is where the psychological power of small beginnings lives. Consider someone who's been avoiding starting a fitness routine. In their imagination, exercise is exhausting, painful, time-consuming, and overwhelming. They picture themselves gasping for breath, muscles burning, struggling through an hour of misery. This mental image keeps them stuck. But then they take a small first step. They put on workout clothes and walk around the block for 5 minutes. That's it. What they discover is that it's manageable. Maybe even pleasant. The catastrophic projection doesn't match the modest reality. And crucially, they've proven to themselves that starting is possible. This proof is everything. One of the primary reasons we procrastinate is that we don't trust ourselves to handle the task. We've failed before, or we've struggled before, and those memories create a belief that we're not capable. But every small beginning is evidence against that belief. It's a demonstration that you can start, that you can take action, that capability is available to you. String together enough small beginnings and you don't just complete tasks. You rebuild your self-concept from someone who can't to someone who can. There's also a neurological dimension to this. When you take action, even small action, your brain releases dopamine as a reward for moving toward a goal. This creates a positive feedback loop. The action feels good, so you're more likely to take another action, which also feels good, which makes the next action more likely. But this loop can only start with movement. As long as you're stuck in inaction, the dopamine reward system isn't engaged. The small beginning is what activates it. Small beginnings also leverage a psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect, which states that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. Once you start something, your brain keeps it active in your background processing, looking for opportunities to continue. You might take a 5-minute action and then move on to something else, but your subconscious continues working on the task. Ideas emerge. Connections form. When you return to the task, you often find it easier than expected because your brain has been preparing in the background. But this effect only triggers after you begin. Let me share a powerful example. A writer had been blocked on a novel for over a year. Every time she thought about working on it, she felt paralyzed by the magnitude of what remained. The manuscript felt like a mountain she could never climb. Finally, she committed to the smallest possible beginning. She would open the document and read one paragraph. Just read. Not write. Not fix. Just read one paragraph. She did it. And something unexpected happened. Reading that paragraph reconnected her with the voice and story. She felt a small spark of engagement. The next day, she did it again. Then she started writing one sentence after reading. Then 2 sentences. Within 2 weeks, she was writing for an hour each morning, not from force, but from genuine desire that had been unlocked by those tiny beginnings. The psychological power of small beginnings is that they bypass your resistance. Your brain can't muster the full force of procrastination against an action that's clearly trivial. I'm just going to organize one drawer doesn't trigger the same avoidance as I'm going to organize the entire house. But once you start with that one drawer, momentum builds naturally. The task becomes less abstract, more concrete, and concrete tasks are always easier than abstract ones. Small beginnings also honor a truth about human motivation that many people misunderstand. We think motivation comes first, then action. But usually, it's the reverse. Action generates motivation. You don't wait until you feel like doing something. You start doing it, and the feeling follows. The small beginning is what initiates this process. You don't need to feel motivated to read one paragraph or organize one drawer. But doing so often creates the motivation to continue. This principle transforms procrastination from an unsolvable problem into a solvable one. You're not trying to overcome massive resistance. You're simply finding the smallest beginning possible, an action so small that resistance can't grip it. And then you let momentum, feedback loops, and the psychological power of progress carry you forward. The beginning is everything, and the beginning can always be small. The insidious effect of decision fatigue. Let's conclude this chapter by exploring one of the most underappreciated cognitive roots of procrastination, decision fatigue. Every decision you make throughout the day, from what to wear to what to eat to how to respond to an email, consumes a portion of your finite decision-making capacity. As this capacity depletes, your ability to make good decisions degrades, and more importantly for our purposes, your willingness to make decisions at all decreases. You become decision-averse, and when starting a task requires making decisions, you're more likely to avoid it entirely. This is why procrastination often gets worse as the day progresses. It's not just physical fatigue. It's decision fatigue. By evening, you've made hundreds of small choices, each one draining your decision-making reserves. When you finally sit down to work on that important project, you're not approaching it with fresh mental resources. You're approaching it with depleted ones, and every aspect of the task that requires a choice, what to work on first, how to approach it, what format to use, these feel exhausting rather than engaging. Decision fatigue also explains why highly successful people often adopt strict routines and limitations around trivial choices. They wear the same outfit every day, eat the same breakfast, follow the same morning routine. This isn't eccentricity. It's decision management. By eliminating trivial decisions, they preserve their decision-making capacity for important choices that actually matter. You can apply this same principle to overcome procrastination. Identify the decisions embedded in the tasks you're avoiding and make those decisions in advance. If you need to write a report, pre-decide, what's the structure? What are the main points? What's the tone? Make these choices when your decision-making capacity is fresh, write them down, and then when it's time to actually write, you're not facing a blank page and a series of exhausting choices. You're executing a plan you've already created. This is also why vague tasks are doubly problematic. Not only do they lack clarity, they also force you to make decisions about what the task even means before you can start executing. You're burning decision-making resources just to figure out what to do, and by the time you've figured it out, you might be too fatigued to actually do it. Clear, pre-decided tasks eliminate this double burden. There's also the concept of decision paralysis that's related to fatigue. When you have too many options, making a choice becomes overwhelming. This is why people procrastinate on tasks like organize my closet or plan my career. The number of possible approaches, the multitude of choices involved, it creates a cognitive traffic jam. The solution is to limit options deliberately. Give yourself just 2 or 3 viable approaches. Make a decision from that limited set. Then execute. Removing the paradox of choice removes a major source of procrastination. Environmental design plays a role here too. An environment filled with choices, what to focus on, where to sit, which tools to use, is an environment that accelerates decision fatigue. But an environment designed for focus, where the choices have been made in advance, where there's one clear place to work and one clear task to do, preserves your decision-making capacity for the work itself. Understanding decision fatigue also changes how you structure your day. Handle important, decision-heavy tasks early when your capacity is highest. Save routine, low-decision tasks for later when you're depleted. And build in decision-free zones, periods where you follow a predetermined plan without having to think about what comes next. These practices protect the precious resource of decision-making capacity and make procrastination less likely throughout the entire day. As we close this chapter, reflect on how these cognitive roots, unclear tasks, activation energy, task chunking, cognitive load, the power of small beginnings, and decision fatigue, have been operating invisibly in your life. How many times have you called yourself lazy when actually you were facing a task with high activation energy? How often have you felt overwhelmed when actually you were exceeding your cognitive capacity? How frequently have you struggled to start when actually you just needed a clearer, smaller beginning? These aren't character flaws. They're design problems, and design problems can be solved. In the next chapter, we'll build on these insights, giving you practical frameworks that work with your cognitive architecture rather than against it. But for now, simply understanding these roots is transformative. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're understanding yourself. And understanding is the foundation of change. Chapter 4, Breaking the Cycle, Practical Frameworks. Welcome back. You've journeyed through the hidden roots of procrastination, explored the emotional undercurrents that keep you stuck, and begun to understand the psychological patterns that have shaped your relationship with action. Now comes the part that transforms insight into movement. This chapter is about building bridges between understanding and doing, between knowing what holds you back and actually breaking free. Breaking the cycle of procrastination isn't about willpower alone. It's about designing systems that work with your brain rather than against it. It's about creating frameworks that make starting easier than staying stuck. And perhaps most importantly, it's about reshaping your identity from someone who struggles with procrastination into someone who acts with intention and clarity. Let me be clear from the start, none of these frameworks are magic bullets. They won't eliminate every moment of resistance or doubt. What they will do is give you reliable pathways through that resistance, turning the abstract desire to change into concrete, repeatable actions. Think of them as tools in a toolkit, each designed for a specific kind of friction you encounter on your path forward. The 2-minute activation rule. Let's begin with something deceptively simple, yet remarkably powerful. The 2-minute activation rule states this. When facing a task you're avoiding, commit only to doing it for 2 minutes. Not 2 hours. Not until it's finished. Just 2 minutes of genuine engagement. Why does this work? Because procrastination thrives on the imagination of difficulty. Your mind projects the entire overwhelming scope of a task, sees the mountain ahead, and decides it's safer to stay in the valley. But that mountain is an illusion created by anticipation. The 2-minute rule collapses that illusion by making the commitment so small that your resistance has nothing to grip onto. Imagine you've been avoiding writing a report for weeks. Every time you think about it, your body tenses. Your mind floods with reasons why now isn't the right time. But what if you told yourself, I'm only going to work on this for 2 minutes? I'll open the document, write a single sentence, maybe jot down a rough outline. That's it. 2 minutes, then I'm free to walk away. Something fascinating happens when you do this. First, you actually start, which is often the hardest part. Second, those 2 minutes frequently turn into 5, then 10, then an hour of focused work, not because you forced yourself, but because once you're in motion, staying in motion becomes natural. The activation energy has been spent. You've crossed the threshold. But here's the crucial part. Even if you stop after exactly 2 minutes, you've succeeded. You've proven to yourself that starting is possible. You've weakened the association between this task and overwhelming dread. You've deposited a small success into your psychological bank account, and over time, these deposits compound into genuine confidence. Think of it like this: procrastination builds walls between you and your tasks, brick by brick, excuse by excuse. The 2-minute rule doesn't try to demolish the entire wall at once. It removes one brick. Then another. Then another. Eventually, you realize the wall was never as solid as you believed. Let me share a story. There was a writer who hadn't touched her novel manuscript in 8 months. Every day, she felt the weight of that abandoned project, the guilt of promises unkept to herself. The task had grown monstrous in her mind. When she finally tried the 2-minute rule, she set a timer and committed only to reading the last paragraph she'd written. Just reading, not even writing. Those 2 minutes reconnected her to the voice of her story. The next day, she did it again. By the 4th day, she wrote a new paragraph. Within 2 weeks, she was writing an hour each morning, not from discipline, but from reawakened desire. The 2-minute commitment became the doorway back to her creative self. This framework works because it bypasses your brain's threat detection system. When you commit to the whole project, your amygdala perceives threat, effort, potential failure, emotional discomfort. But 2 minutes? That's beneath the threshold of threat. It's so small your defenses don't even activate. And once you're engaged, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for executive function and goal-directed behavior, takes over naturally. Use this rule not just for tasks you've been avoiding, but as a daily practice. Starting your morning routine? 2 minutes. Exercising? 2 minutes. Responding to that difficult email? 2 minutes. The pattern you're building isn't just about completing tasks. It's about proving to yourself, again and again, that starting is safe, that action is available to you, that you are capable of moving through resistance. The micro-commitment loop. Now let's go deeper. The micro-commitment loop builds on the 2-minute rule by creating a self-reinforcing cycle of action, acknowledgement, and renewed commitment. It's a framework that turns single moments of action into sustainable momentum. Here's how it works. You make a micro-commitment, something almost absurdly small. Not I'll exercise for an hour, but I'll put on my workout clothes. Not I'll clean the entire kitchen, but I'll put one dish in the dishwasher. You complete this micro-commitment, then you pause. This is the crucial part, you consciously acknowledge what you just did. You notice it. You let yourself feel the tiny satisfaction of having done what you said you'd do. Then comes the loop, you make another micro-commitment, slightly building on the previous one. Maybe now you walk to your exercise mat. Maybe you put 2 more dishes away. Complete it. Acknowledge it. Commit again. Each cycle strengthens the next. Why is this so effective? Because it works with how your brain actually builds habits and motivation. Most people think motivation comes first, then action. But neuroscience shows us the opposite is often true, action generates motivation. When you complete even tiny commitments, your brain releases small amounts of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. This neurochemical feedback makes the next action easier, more appealing. But there's something even more profound happening. Each micro-commitment is an act of integrity with yourself. You're proving that your word to yourself matters. You're rebuilding trust between your conscious intentions and your actual behavior. If you've spent years breaking promises to yourself, this loop becomes a healing practice, one small commitment at a time. Let me paint a picture of what this looks like in practice. Suppose you need to organize your workspace, a task you've avoided for months because it feels overwhelming. Instead of forcing yourself to do the whole thing, you start with a micro-commitment, I'll clear just one corner of my desk. You do it. Then you pause. You look at that cleared space and let yourself notice, I did that. It's small, but it's real. Then the next commitment, I'll sort these papers into 2 piles, keep and recycle. You do it. Acknowledge it. Next, I'll put these pens in the drawer. Each action builds on the last, and within 30 minutes, your workspace is transformed, not through force, but through a gentle, accumulating series of kept promises. The beauty of the micro-commitment loop is that it's failure-proof. If you stop after one commitment, you've still succeeded. You've still proven something important to yourself. There's no pressure to complete everything, which paradoxically makes completing everything more likely. It removes the all-or-nothing thinking that so often accompanies procrastination, either I do this perfectly and completely, or I don't do it at all. The loop offers a third path, I do what I can, acknowledge it, and that becomes the foundation for more. This framework also trains you to be present with your actions rather than constantly projecting into an imagined future of completion. Procrastination often feeds on the gap between where you are and where you think you should be. The micro-commitment loop closes that gap by making right now, this exact moment, enough. You're not trying to get somewhere else. You're simply honoring this small commitment, then the next one, then the next. Over time, something shifts in your nervous system. The activation energy required to start things decreases. Your tolerance for sustained effort increases. Not because you've forced yourself into discipline, but because you've created a positive feedback loop between intention and action, between commitment and follow-through. You become someone who does what they say they'll do, even in the smallest things, and that identity transformation ripples into everything else. Immediate feedback reinforcement. Let's turn now to a principle that most personal development approaches overlook, the power of immediate feedback. Your brain is wired to learn from consequences that happen quickly. Delayed gratification is valuable, but delayed feedback weakens the connection between action and outcome, making it harder to build new patterns. Immediate feedback reinforcement means designing visible, tangible responses to your efforts that happen right away, not weeks or months later. This isn't about external rewards, though those can help. It's about creating a system where progress is felt and seen in real time. Consider someone learning to code. If they write a program and have to wait days to see if it works, learning becomes slow and demotivating. But modern coding environments provide immediate feedback. You write a line, run it, see the result instantly. This tight feedback loop accelerates learning and maintains engagement. You can apply this same principle to any area where you're struggling with procrastination. Let's say you're trying to develop a writing practice. Instead of measuring success by eventual publication or perfect prose, create immediate feedback markers. Use a word count tracker that updates in real time. Keep a visible chart where you place a check mark for every writing session completed. Write in a journal at the end of each session how it felt, what you noticed, what you're proud of. These simple practices create neural connections between the action of writing and a sense of accomplishment. Or imagine you're working to improve your physical health. The scale might not change for weeks, which can be discouraging. But you can create immediate feedback, track how you feel after each workout on a simple 1 to 10 scale. Take progress photos daily and review them in sequence. Notice and write down the immediate energizing effects of healthy meals. These markers give your brain the feedback it craves now, sustaining motivation while the larger changes unfold over time. The key is making progress visible and tangible. Your brain responds powerfully to evidence. When that evidence is immediate, it reinforces the behavior that created it. This is why video games are so engaging. They provide constant feedback through points, levels, sounds, visual changes. You're not waiting to see if your actions mattered. You know instantly. But here's where this gets psychologically sophisticated. The feedback needs to be aligned with your actual values and goals, not just arbitrary metrics. If you're writing to express truth, tracking word count is useful, but also journal about moments of authentic expression. If you're exercising for well-being, notice not just physical changes but emotional and mental ones. The feedback should reflect what genuinely matters to you, otherwise it becomes hollow. This framework also helps you catch and correct course quickly. If you're applying a strategy and it's not working, immediate feedback tells you right away rather than after weeks of frustration. You become agile in your approach, adjusting and experimenting based on what the feedback shows you. This transforms procrastination from a static problem into a dynamic process of learning and adaptation. Moreover, immediate feedback combats one of procrastination's sneakiest tactics, the feeling that your efforts don't matter. When progress is invisible or delayed, your brain starts to believe that action and outcome aren't connected. Why bother if nothing changes? But when you create systems where every action produces visible feedback, you reinforce the truth that your choices matter, your effort counts, your behavior shapes your reality. Environment design, shaping the spaces that shape you. Now let's shift from internal frameworks to external ones. Your environment isn't neutral. The spaces you inhabit, the objects within your reach, the visual cues surrounding you, all of these exert constant influence on your behavior, often without your conscious awareness. Environment design is the practice of intentionally shaping your physical and digital spaces to make desired behaviors easier and undesired behaviors harder. Think about this: if every time you sit at your desk, your phone is within arm's reach, you're designing for distraction. If the first thing you see when you wake up is your running shoes placed beside your bed, you're designing for movement. Your environment votes on what you'll do next, and it votes thousands of times per day. The principle here is simple but profound: change your environment, change your behavior. Instead of relying on willpower to resist temptation or push through resistance, restructure your surroundings so that the path of least resistance becomes the path you want to take. Let's explore this practically. Suppose you want to read more but find yourself endlessly scrolling social media instead. You could try to simply resist the urge through willpower each evening, or you could redesign your environment. Place a book on your nightstand and your phone in another room. Create a comfortable reading corner with good lighting and your favorite tea nearby. Remove the friction from reading and add friction to scrolling. Your behavior will shift not because you've become more disciplined, but because you've made the desired action easier than the undesired one. Or consider your workspace. If you're procrastinating on important projects, look at what your desk is telling you to do. Are important materials buried under clutter? Are distractions prominent and goals invisible? Redesign. Create a workspace where the task you need to focus on is front and center, where tools you need are within easy reach, where everything else is put away or out of sight. Your environment should be a physical manifestation of your intentions. This extends to digital environments too. How many browser tabs do you keep open? What notifications are enabled on your devices? What apps appear on your home screen? Each of these is an environmental cue that influences your attention and behavior. Design your digital space with the same intentionality as your physical one. Use website blockers during focus hours. Turn off non-essential notifications. Organize your digital workspace so that what you need for important work is accessible and what distracts you requires extra steps to reach. There's psychological depth here worth exploring. Your environment communicates messages about identity. A cluttered, chaotic space whispers, your life is overwhelming and out of control. A space designed for focused work declares, you are someone who creates and accomplishes. These messages seep into your subconscious, shaping how you see yourself and what feels possible. By designing your environment, you're not just making tasks easier, you're crafting an identity-supportive context that reminds you of who you're becoming. Environment design also honors a truth about human nature: we're all conserving energy constantly. Our brains are always calculating the effort required for different actions and choosing paths of least resistance. This isn't laziness, it's evolutionary efficiency. Instead of fighting this tendency, work with it. Make the things that move you toward your goals the path of least resistance, and watch how naturally your behavior shifts. Dopamine management and attention hygiene. Let's address something fundamental. Your relationship with dopamine, the neurotransmitter that drives motivation, focus, and the pursuit of rewards. In our modern world, this system is under constant assault from supernormal stimuli, social media engineered for addictive engagement, streaming services offering endless novelty, games designed to hijack reward pathways. Understanding and managing your dopamine system isn't optional anymore. It's essential for breaking procrastination patterns. Here's what you need to understand. Dopamine isn't about pleasure itself, it's about the anticipation and pursuit of rewards. When your dopamine system is healthy and balanced, you feel motivated to pursue meaningful goals, you can focus on challenging tasks, and you experience satisfaction from effort. But when this system becomes dysregulated through overstimulation, something insidious happens: you lose motivation for anything that doesn't provide immediate, intense stimulation. Long-term projects feel impossibly boring. Deep work becomes almost painful. Procrastination becomes the default because your brain is constantly seeking the next hit of easy dopamine. Think of your dopamine system like a financial account. Every intense, easy pleasure makes a withdrawal: scrolling social media, binge-watching shows, playing addictive games, checking notifications compulsively. These activities flood your system with dopamine without requiring effort or patience. Over time, your baseline drops. You need stronger and stronger stimuli just to feel okay, and activities that once felt rewarding, reading, creating, problem-solving, now feel flat and unrewarding. The solution is dopamine management, intentionally protecting and rebalancing this system. This means practicing attention hygiene, the discipline of being selective about what you allow to capture your focus. Start by identifying your high dopamine, low effort habits. What do you reach for when you're bored or uncomfortable? What apps do you check compulsively? These are your dopamine drains. Now, implement dopamine fasting, not as total abstinence, but as strategic rest for your reward system. Choose regular periods, perhaps one morning per week or the first hour of each day, where you abstain from high-stimulation activities. No phone, no internet browsing, no entertainment media. Just low-stimulation activities: walking, thinking, simple tasks, presence. This feels uncomfortable at first because your brain is accustomed to constant stimulation. But persist, and something remarkable happens: your baseline begins to reset. Activities that previously felt boring start to feel engaging again. Your capacity for focus returns. Pair this with attention hygiene practices. Treat your attention as precious, because it is. Every notification, every app, every website is competing for it, often using sophisticated psychological techniques to capture and hold it. Take back control. Turn off all non-essential notifications. Schedule specific times for email and social media rather than checking reactively. When you're working on important tasks, use single tasking, one browser tab, one document, full attention. Protect your focus like you'd protect your health, because attentional health is foundational to everything else. There's also a positive side to dopamine management, learning to derive pleasure from effort itself. When you engage in challenging work with full presence, when you push through initial resistance and enter a state of flow, your brain releases dopamine naturally, rewarded by the process of growth and mastery. But you can only access this if your system isn't overwhelmed by artificial stimulation. By managing the cheap dopamine sources, you become capable of experiencing the deeper rewards of meaningful effort. This isn't about becoming joyless or denying yourself pleasure. It's about recalibrating so that your pleasure comes from things that actually enrich your life rather than things that merely occupy your time. It's about training your brain to find work engaging rather than agonizing. And it's about breaking the specific procrastination pattern where you avoid important tasks because your dopamine system has been hijacked by distractions that offer easier rewards. Identity-based discipline, becoming someone who acts. Finally, we arrive at perhaps the most transformative framework of all, identity-based discipline. Most approaches to overcoming procrastination focus on behavior: do this, don't do that, follow these steps. But lasting change happens at a deeper level, at the level of identity. It's not about forcing yourself to act differently. It's about becoming someone different, someone for whom disciplined action is natural rather than forced. Here's the insight: every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. When you do the hard thing, when you start despite resistance, when you follow through on a commitment, you're casting a vote for the identity of a disciplined person. When you procrastinate, when you give in to distraction, when you break promises to yourself, you're voting for a different identity. Your sense of self is shaped by the accumulated evidence of these votes. The shift from behavior-based to identity-based change is profound. Instead of saying, "I need to stop procrastinating," you say, "I am becoming someone who takes action decisively." Instead of, "I should work out more," you think, "I am someone who takes care of my body." This isn't just positive thinking or affirmation. It's a fundamental reorientation of how you approach change. When your goal is behavior-focused, you're always fighting against your current self. You're trying to force actions that don't align with who you believe you are. This creates constant friction and requires tremendous willpower. But when your goal is identity-focused, every action becomes an opportunity to reinforce your evolving sense of self. You're not fighting yourself. You're becoming yourself. So how do you build identity-based discipline? Start by asking, who do I want to become? Not what do I want to achieve, but who do I want to be? Do you want to be someone creative, healthy, reliable, focused, courageous? Get clear on this. Then ask, what would someone like that do in this situation? When facing a task you're tempted to avoid, ask, what would a disciplined person do right now? Then act as if you already are that person, even if you don't fully feel it yet. This practice is powerful because it closes the gap between your actions and your identity. Every time you act consistently with your desired identity, you collect evidence for that identity. Over time, the identity becomes real, not as a pretense, but as a lived truth. You're not pretending to be disciplined. You've become disciplined through accumulated acts of discipline. But here's what makes this approach sustainable: it's compassionate. When you slip, when you procrastinate, when you fail to act as you intended, you don't interpret it as evidence of who you are. You see it as a vote that didn't align with your direction, and you remember that the next vote is coming soon. No single action defines you. Your identity is shaped by the pattern of actions over time. There's also room here for what I call identity experimentation. Try on different identities like you might try on clothes. For a week, be someone who starts tasks immediately. For another week, be someone who works in focused blocks. Notice what fits, what feels authentic, what produces the life you want. Your identity isn't fixed. It's something you actively craft through conscious choice and repeated action. This framework transforms discipline from something you impose on yourself into something that flows from who you are. The disciplined action isn't a departure from your nature, it's an expression of it. And that changes everything. Because you're no longer fighting against procrastination with sheer force of will. You're moving toward a version of yourself that acts with clarity, purpose, and self-trust. As we close this chapter, remember, these frameworks aren't separate techniques to be applied in isolation. They work together, each reinforcing the others. The 2-minute rule gets you started. The micro-commitment loop sustains momentum. Immediate feedback keeps you engaged. Environment design removes obstacles. Dopamine management restores your capacity for focus. And identity-based discipline transforms everything into an act of becoming. You're not just breaking the cycle of procrastination. You're building a new relationship with action itself, one where starting is natural, where follow-through is who you are, and where your life reflects your deepest intentions. This is the work. This is the path. And you're already on it. Chapter 5: Rebuilding Yourself, a Life Without Procrastination. We've arrived at the final chapter, but in truth, this is where your real journey begins. Everything you've learned, every insight you've gained, every framework you've explored, they've all been preparation for this moment. The moment when you step into a life where procrastination no longer holds power over you. Not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've built systems, perspectives, and habits that make consistent action the natural rhythm of your days. This chapter is about integration. It's about taking all the pieces we've examined and weaving them into a sustainable way of living. It's about understanding that a life without procrastination isn't about perpetual productivity or relentless achievement. It's about freedom. The freedom to pursue what matters. The freedom to trust yourself. The freedom to live aligned with your deepest values rather than constantly at war with your own resistance. Let's rebuild together. Not from a place of brokenness, but from a place of possibility. Sustainable systems for daily life. Here's a truth that most productivity advice ignores: willpower is finite, but systems are renewable. You cannot rely on motivation or discipline alone to carry you through every day of your life. What you need are systems, structures that make the right actions automatic, that reduce the need for constant decision-making, that work even when you're tired, stressed, or uninspired. A sustainable system is one that doesn't require you to be your best self to function. It works when you're at 70%. It works on difficult days. It's robust enough to handle life's inevitable disruptions yet flexible enough to adapt as your circumstances change. The goal isn't to create a rigid schedule that controls every moment. The goal is to design a framework that supports your intentions without suffocating your spontaneity. Let's start with your morning, because how you begin your day sets the tone for everything that follows. Instead of waking up and immediately reacting to the world, checking messages, scrolling news, letting external stimuli dictate your state, create a morning system that anchors you in intention. This doesn't need to be elaborate. It might look like this: wake at a consistent time, drink water, move your body for 10 minutes, spend 5 minutes clarifying your top 3 priorities for the day, then begin your most important work before touching your phone or email. Notice what this system does. It removes decision fatigue. You're not negotiating with yourself each morning about what to do. The structure is already there. It protects your peak energy and attention for what matters most. It creates momentum before the chaos of the day can derail you. And perhaps most importantly, it reinforces your identity as someone who acts with intention rather than reacts to circumstances. But sustainability also means knowing yourself. If you're not a morning person, don't build a system that requires you to be one. Design around your natural rhythms. Maybe your peak focus comes in the afternoon or late evening. Structure your most important work for those windows. The point isn't to follow someone else's ideal system. It's to create one that works for your unique biology, psychology, and life circumstances. Your system should also include what I call maintenance rituals, small regular practices that keep your life from accumulating chaos. A weekly planning session where you review your commitments and clarify priorities. A daily 10-minute reset where you tidy your workspace and prepare for tomorrow. A monthly reflection where you assess what's working and what needs adjustment. These rituals prevent the kind of overwhelming buildup that triggers procrastination. They keep your life manageable rather than letting it spiral into a state where everything feels urgent and nothing feels doable. Consider also the power of batching and theming. Instead of fragmenting your attention across multiple types of tasks throughout the day, group similar activities together. Have a communication block where you handle all emails and messages at once. A creative block for writing, designing, or strategic thinking. An administrative block for scheduling, organizing, and routine tasks. This reduces the cognitive cost of constant context switching and allows you to enter deeper states of focus within each domain. Sustainability also requires building in rest and renewal. Your system shouldn't run you into the ground. Include deliberate breaks, not as guilty indulgences, but as essential components of sustained performance. A system that doesn't honor your need for restoration will eventually collapse, taking you with it. Plan for downtime. Schedule days off. Create boundaries between work and life. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And here's something crucial: your system should include triggers and fail-safes for when things go wrong, because they will. What do you do when you miss a morning routine? When an unexpected crisis derails your plans? When you feel yourself slipping back into old patterns? Having predetermined responses to these situations prevents them from becoming catastrophes. Maybe your failsafe is simply, when I notice I've gone off track, I return to the smallest possible action, the 2-minute rule, a single micro-commitment. Just get back on the path without judgment or drama. Over time, your system becomes invisible. It's no longer something you think about or force yourself to follow. It's simply how you live. The structure fades into the background, and what emerges is a life where action flows naturally, where you accomplish things without constant struggle, where you have the energy and space for what truly matters because you're not wasting it on chaos and resistance. Discipline equals freedom, a paradigm shift. Let's confront a misunderstanding that keeps many people trapped in procrastination. They see discipline as the enemy of freedom, as constraint, as the death of spontaneity and joy. They imagine the disciplined life as rigid, joyless, controlled by rules and schedules that crush the human spirit. And so they rebel against discipline, seeking freedom through doing whatever they feel like in the moment. But this leads to a paradox. Without discipline, you become enslaved to your impulses, your moods, your fears. You're not free to pursue your deepest goals because you're constantly derailed by momentary desires for comfort or distraction. You're not free to create the life you envision because you're controlled by habits and patterns that run on autopilot. The absence of discipline doesn't create freedom. It creates chaos, regret, and a gnawing sense that you're not living up to your potential. The truth is this: discipline equals freedom. Real freedom. Not the illusion of freedom that comes from doing whatever you want in the moment, but the deep, lasting freedom of being able to choose your life's direction and actually move in that direction consistently. Think about it this way. If you lack the discipline to manage your finances, you're not free. You're enslaved to debt, to financial stress, to limitations on what you can do and where you can go. But if you develop the discipline to spend wisely, save consistently, and invest thoughtfully, you gain the freedom to make choices based on what you want rather than what you can afford. If you lack the discipline to take care of your health, you're not free. Your body becomes a limitation, restricting your energy, your mobility, your capacity to engage fully with life. But if you develop the discipline to move regularly, eat well, and rest adequately, you gain the freedom of a body that supports rather than hinders your aspirations. If you lack the discipline to focus and do deep work, you're not free. You're at the mercy of every distraction, every notification, every impulse to check social media or escape into entertainment. Your attention is owned by forces outside yourself. But if you develop the discipline to protect your focus and direct it intentionally, you gain the freedom to create, to learn, to make meaningful contributions, to experience the profound satisfaction of absorbed engagement. The disciplined person isn't constrained by their habits and systems. They're liberated by them. The structure creates space. The consistency creates possibility. The self-control creates self-trust, and self-trust is the foundation of all freedom because it means you can rely on yourself to do what matters regardless of how you feel in the moment. This perspective shift is transformative. When you stop seeing discipline as punishment and start seeing it as the pathway to freedom, everything changes. You're no longer forcing yourself to do things you hate. You're choosing to develop capacities that expand what's possible for you. You're not sacrificing present pleasure for future benefit. You're investing in a version of yourself that experiences more pleasure, more joy, more fulfillment because you're living in alignment with your values rather than in constant conflict with yourself. Consider the artist who lacks discipline. They wait for inspiration, for the muse to strike, for the perfect moment when creativity flows effortlessly. But inspiration is fickle. It comes rarely. And so they create rarely. They remain frustrated, full of unrealized potential. Now consider the artist who develops the discipline to show up to their craft daily, regardless of mood or inspiration. They're not waiting for freedom to create. They've claimed the freedom to create through discipline. And paradoxically, through that consistent practice, inspiration comes more frequently because they're always ready to receive it. Or think about relationships. The undisciplined approach to relationships is to engage when you feel like it, to communicate when it's easy, to show up when it's convenient. This doesn't create freedom in relationships. It creates instability, mistrust, distance. But the disciplined approach, showing up consistently, communicating even when it's difficult, investing attention and care as regular practice, this creates the freedom of deep trust, of intimacy, of relationships that enrich rather than drain you. The shift from seeing discipline as constraint to seeing it as liberation might be the most important mental reframe in this entire book. Because once you make this shift, you stop resisting the very thing that would set you free. You start embracing discipline not as a harsh taskmaster but as a trusted guide leading you toward the life you actually want to live. And here's the beautiful paradox: the more disciplined you become, the less discipline you need. The actions that once required enormous willpower become automatic. The choices that once caused internal conflict become obvious. The life that once felt like a constant struggle becomes a natural flow. Discipline builds the structures that eventually allow you to move through life with ease, with confidence, with the freedom that comes from knowing you can trust yourself completely. The benefits of a focused life. In our distracted age, focus has become a superpower. The ability to direct your attention fully to what matters, to sustain that attention despite internal and external pulls toward distraction, this ability is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. But beyond its practical benefits, living a focused life transforms the quality of your experience in ways that are hard to appreciate until you've tasted them. Let's start with the obvious: productivity and achievement. When you can focus, you accomplish more in less time. Not because you're working harder, but because you're working with greater intensity and effectiveness. An hour of focused work produces more than 4 hours of distracted half-attention. You enter flow states where time disappears and you're fully absorbed in what you're doing. Problems that seemed impossible suddenly become solvable. Creative insights emerge. Skills develop rapidly. The focused life is simply more generative, more creative, more capable. But the benefits go deeper than output. There's something profound that happens to your sense of self when you live with focus. You begin to know yourself more clearly because you're actually present with your own experience rather than constantly escaping it. You develop what psychologists call psychological coherence, the feeling that your actions, values, and identity are aligned. You're not fragmented, pulled in 1,000 directions, wondering why nothing feels satisfying. You're whole, directed, purposeful. Focus also changes your relationship with time. When you're constantly distracted, time slips away without you noticing. Days blur into weeks, months into years, and you look back wondering where it all went. But when you live with focus, you inhabit your time. Each moment feels more substantial because you're actually there for it. Paradoxically, life feels both slower and fuller. Slower because you're present for the details. Fuller because you're not wasting time on mindless consumption and distraction. There's also a remarkable emotional benefit to sustained focus. Much of modern anxiety comes from fragmented attention. Your mind is always partially elsewhere, monitoring multiple concerns, unable to settle. But when you can focus fully on one thing, anxiety decreases. Not because your problems have disappeared, but because you're not trying to hold everything in your awareness simultaneously. You can engage deeply with one task, complete it, then move to the next. This creates a sense of manageability that reduces overwhelm. Focus also deepens your relationships. When you're with someone and you're actually present, fully attentive, not checking your phone, not mentally planning what you'll say next, not distracted by internal chatter, the quality of connection transforms. People feel seen and valued. Conversations become richer. Understanding deepens. The focused life extends to focused presence with others, and this creates relationships of profound intimacy and trust. Moreover, focus is the pathway to mastery. Every skill worth developing requires sustained, deliberate attention. You cannot become excellent at anything through distracted dabbling. But when you can bring full focus to practice, to learning, to refinement, you progress rapidly. You notice subtleties. You make connections. You develop intuition. Whether you're pursuing a craft, a sport, an intellectual discipline, or a spiritual practice, focus is what transforms effort into excellence. There's also a spiritual dimension to focus that's worth acknowledging. Many contemplative traditions teach that the ability to direct and sustain attention is fundamental to enlightenment, to awakening, to liberation. When you can focus your mind, you're no longer its slave. You're its master. You can choose what to attend to and what to release. This isn't about control in a rigid sense. It's about freedom, the freedom to not be tossed around by every impulse, emotion, or distraction that arises. Living a focused life also means you experience greater satisfaction from your accomplishments. When you achieve something through scattered, stressed, fragmented effort, even success feels hollow. But when you achieve something through sustained focus, through full engagement, the satisfaction runs deep. You know you gave your best. You were fully present for the journey. The result matters, but so does the quality of attention you brought to the process. And perhaps most importantly, focus allows you to live intentionally rather than reactively. The unfocused life is a reactive life, constantly responding to whatever captures your attention in the moment. But the focused life is an authored life. You decide what deserves your attention. You direct your energy toward what aligns with your values. You create rather than merely consume. You build rather than merely respond. You become the protagonist of your own story rather than a side character in everyone else's. Small steps, long-term gains, the compound effect. Let's talk about patience and perspective, two qualities that are essential for lasting change but often overlooked in our culture of instant gratification. The work you've done in this book, the insights you've gained, the practices you've begun, these will not transform your life overnight. They will transform it slowly, steadily, through the accumulated effect of small actions repeated over time. This is the compound effect, the principle that small, consistent actions produce exponential results over the long term. Just as compound interest turns modest savings into substantial wealth over decades, compound effort turns modest daily disciplines into remarkable life transformation. But you have to understand the timeline. The gains are invisible at first. Frustratingly so. You might work consistently for weeks and see little change. But persist, and the effects begin to accumulate. Persist longer, and they begin to multiply. Imagine you improve by just 1% each day. A single day's improvement is nearly imperceptible. But over a year, 1% daily growth compounds to making you 37 times better. This is the mathematics of transformation. It's not dramatic. It's not instant. But it's incredibly powerful if you can embrace the gradual process. The problem is that our brains are wired to notice immediate results and discount delayed ones. This is why procrastination is so seductive. The pleasure of avoiding discomfort is immediate. The consequences of avoidance are delayed and easy to rationalize away. But the compound effect works in both directions. Small acts of procrastination seem harmless in the moment. Miss one workout, skip one day of work, indulge one distraction. No big deal, right? But these small choices compound too. Miss 100 workouts and your health degrades. Skip 100 work sessions and your goals remain distant dreams. Indulge 1,000 distractions and you lose years of potential. The wisdom is to become patient with results but impatient with action. Don't obsess over whether you've transformed yet. Focus on whether you're taking the small steps today. Trust the process. Trust the compound effect. Your job isn't to achieve the full transformation immediately. Your job is to make the small deposits consistently, knowing that the returns will come if you persist. Let me share a story that illustrates this beautifully. There was a man who decided to learn piano at age 40. He'd always wanted to play but had convinced himself he was too old, too busy, too untalented. Finally, he started. He committed to practicing 15 minutes every single day. Just 15 minutes. 4 months, his progress felt painfully slow. He stumbled through simple melodies. His fingers felt clumsy. But he kept going. After 6 months, he could play a few complete songs, though not well. After a year, he was starting to enjoy the process. After 2 years, he was playing pieces he'd loved his whole life, experiencing the profound joy of bringing music into existence with his own hands. After 5 years, he was performing for friends and family, creating beauty that moved people to tears. None of this would have happened if he'd given up during those first frustrating months when the gains seemed too small to matter. But he trusted the process. He made his daily deposit of attention and effort. And the compound effect did its work. This principle applies to everything you're learning in this book. The 2-minute rule seems trivial. One 2-minute session changes nothing. But 100 2-minute sessions, spread across months, transform your relationship with starting. Micro-commitments feel insignificant. One tiny action means almost nothing. But thousands of kept commitments reshape your identity and rebuild your self-trust. One day of managing your dopamine barely registers. But months of attention hygiene rewire your brain's reward system and restore your capacity for focus. The long view also gives you resilience during setbacks. If you're measuring success day by day, every bad day feels like failure. But if you're measuring success over months and years, a bad day is just noise in the data. You can have a terrible week, completely fall off track, and still succeed in the long run if you return to your practices and continue forward. The compound effect isn't derailed by temporary setbacks. It only stops working when you stop doing the work. There's also a profound peace that comes with embracing the long view. You stop feeling desperate and frantic. You're not trying to force immediate transformation through unsustainable bursts of effort. You're building steadily, patiently, confidently, knowing that time is your ally. Each day is an opportunity to add to the foundation you're building. Some days you'll add more, some days less. But as long as you keep adding, the structure rises. And here's what many people don't realize until they've lived it: the journey itself becomes fulfilling once you embrace the small steps approach. When you're not fixated on arriving at some distant destination, you can actually enjoy the daily practice. The process becomes the point. You're not postponing satisfaction until you achieve some goal. You're finding satisfaction in the consistent action itself, in the person you're becoming through the practice, in the small daily victories of showing up and following through. The compound effect is patient. It's steady. It's reliable. It requires trust and consistency. But it delivers transformation that lasts because it's built on a foundation of integrated change rather than forced overnight conversion. Trust it. Work with it. And watch as your life transforms through the accumulated power of small steps taken faithfully over time. Your closing guide: simple, powerful, actionable. We've reached the end of our journey together, but this is truly just the beginning of yours. Everything you've learned, all the frameworks and insights, they mean nothing unless they translate into action in your actual life. So let me leave you with a simple, powerful guide you can implement immediately, a practical roadmap for living without procrastination. Start tomorrow morning, or if you're listening to this in the morning, start right now. Before you check your phone, before you engage with the world's demands, take 10 minutes for yourself. Sit quietly. Breathe. Ask yourself 3 questions. What matters most to me today? What would make today meaningful? What's one thing I've been avoiding that I could face? Write down your answers. This simple practice reorients your day around intention rather than reaction. Next, identify your one most important task, the thing that, if you completed it and nothing else, would make today worthwhile. Apply the 2-minute rule to starting it. Commit to just 2 minutes of engagement. Set a timer if you need to. Begin. Notice how starting dissolves resistance. Let those 2 minutes extend naturally if they want to, but don't force it. You're building the habit of starting, and that's what matters most. Throughout your day, practice the micro-commitment loop. When you face resistance, don't try to overcome it with willpower. Make the smallest possible commitment. Complete it. Acknowledge it. Make another. Let momentum build naturally rather than trying to force it into existence. Remember, you're voting for your new identity with every kept micro-commitment. Design your environment for success. Tonight, before you sleep, set up tomorrow for success. Place running shoes by your bed if you want to exercise. Put your phone in another room if you want to reduce distraction. Place the book you want to read on your pillow. Make the desired action the path of least resistance. Your environment should support rather than sabotage your intentions. Manage your dopamine deliberately. Choose specific times for high-stimulation activities like social media and entertainment. Outside those times, protect your attention. When you feel the urge to escape into distraction, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself what you're avoiding. Sometimes you'll still choose the distraction, and that's okay. But the pause creates space for choice rather than automatic reaction, and choice is where freedom lives. At the end of each day, practice reflection. Spend 5 minutes reviewing. What did I do well today? Where did I struggle? What would I do differently? This isn't about judgment. It's about learning. You're gathering data about yourself, understanding your patterns, becoming aware of what works and what doesn't. Write these reflections down. Over time, they become a map of your transformation. Once per week, take 30 minutes for broader planning and assessment. Review your commitments. Clarify your priorities. Adjust your systems based on what you've learned. This weekly ritual prevents drift and keeps you aligned with what truly matters. It's also your opportunity to celebrate progress, to notice how far you've come, to acknowledge the changes that are happening even if they feel slow. Remember the paradigm shift: discipline equals freedom. Every time you act with discipline, remind yourself that you're not constraining yourself. You're liberating yourself. You're building the capacity to live according to your deepest values rather than being tossed around by impulses and circumstances. This perspective shift makes discipline feel like gift rather than burden. Embrace the long view. When you feel discouraged by slow progress, remember the compound effect. Your job isn't to transform completely today. Your job is to take the small step today, trusting that these steps accumulate into something remarkable over time. Be patient with results but impatient with action. Do the work today. Trust the process for the results. When you fall off track, and you will, return without drama or self-punishment. Use your failsafe, the smallest possible action. 2 minutes. 1 micro-commitment. The point isn't never falling. The point is always returning. This resilience, this gentle persistence, this is what sustainable change looks like. Build in rest and renewal. A life without procrastination isn't a life of relentless grinding. It's a life of balanced, sustainable engagement with what matters. Schedule downtime. Protect your sleep. Honor your need for rest. You're not a machine. You're a human being, and human beings need rhythms of effort and recovery to thrive long term. Surround yourself with support. Share your journey with trusted friends or mentors who understand what you're working toward. Join communities of people committed to growth. Read books, listen to podcasts, engage with ideas that reinforce your developing identity. You're not doing this alone. There's wisdom and support available if you seek it. Finally, practice self-compassion. Change is difficult. You'll have setbacks. You'll have days where everything falls apart. Meet those moments not with harsh judgment but with kindness. Treat yourself the way you'd treat a dear friend who is struggling. Acknowledge the difficulty. Honor the effort. Encourage the continuation. This compassionate approach sustains you through the inevitable challenges of transformation. This is your guide. It's simple, but don't mistake simplicity for ease. These practices will challenge you. They'll ask you to show up when you don't feel like it, to persist when progress seems invisible, to trust when doubt whispers that nothing is changing. But if you commit to this path, if you take these small actions consistently over time, your life will transform in ways you can barely imagine from where you stand now. You'll look back 6 months, a year, 5 years from now, and you'll barely recognize the person you were when you started this journey. Not because you'll have become someone else, but because you'll have become more fully yourself. The version of you that was always there beneath the procrastination, beneath the fear, beneath the resistance. The version that acts with clarity, that follows through on commitments, that trusts itself completely. This is possible for you. Not because you're special or exceptional, but because you're human, and humans have this remarkable capacity for change when they understand the right principles and apply them consistently. Everything you need is already within you. These frameworks simply help you access it, organize it, direct it toward the life you want to create. So here's my final invitation to you: begin. Not tomorrow. Not when conditions are perfect. Not when you feel fully ready. Now. Close this audiobook and take one small action toward the person you're becoming. 2 minutes. One micro commitment. A single step forward. Because that's how all transformation begins. Not with grand gestures or dramatic changes, but with the quiet courage to start, to persist, to trust the process. Your life without procrastination is waiting. Not in some distant future, but in this present moment, in the choice you make right now. The choice to act. The choice to trust yourself. The choice to become. Go forward with confidence. You have everything you need. The rest is simply practice, patience, and persistence. And I believe in your capacity for all three. Thank you for this journey together. Now go create the life you've been imagining. It's yours for the taking, one small step at a time.